Hey everybody, so today I am here to do my May wrap up. I read 8 books in the month of May. It was actually a pretty diverse month for me. I had a few romance, a few horror, a couple thrillers, things like that. So it was a well-rounded month for me, but I'm just gonna go ahead and get started. The very first book is Under Her Care by Lucinda Berry. You guys know how I feel about her. She is one of my favorite authors of all time. I just absolutely love her work. I've never read a single book of hers and been disappointed. For this one, I'm actually just gonna read you the synopsis because I've been sitting here trying to figure out how to put it into words and I can't come up with a not confusing way. So I'm just gonna read you the blurb about this book. So it says, on a humid summer day in Alabama, a mayor's wife turns up brutally murdered under a railroad bridge. Standing next to her body is 14-year-old Mason Hill, the autistic son of former Miss USA Genevieve Hill. The locals are quick to level their verdict on young Mason. He did it. The town detective calls in local autism expert Casey Walker to consult on the case. At first, Casey tries to keep an open mind, but the more time she spends with Genevieve, the more her unease grows, and she suspects Genevieve is doing more than just protecting her son. Casey's misgivings surrounding Genevieve's story only intensifies as she meets Savannah, Genevieve's 19-year-old daughter. Savannah, as it turns out, has some disturbing secrets of her own. But as Casey dives ever deeper into the Hill family dynamic, her search for the truth leads to another shocking murder, one that shatters her understanding of the human condition in ways she never imagined. So, yes, better that I just read the blurb because that actually does it justice more than any of my explanations ever could. So I actually didn't even know what this book was about. I just knew Lucinda Berry was coming out with a new book and I would read it. So I went into this one completely blind and I thoroughly enjoyed it. I feel like, and I've said this before about Lucinda Berry, she writes about important subjects with such respect. You can tell the time and care she puts into these subjects. The autism community is not one that I have personal experience with, so I can't speak on whether the representation in this book was good or bad, but from somebody who is not looking in, I felt like it was a very well done book. Like I said, keep in mind, my opinion is not one of that of somebody who is in the community. Just like with all the other Lucinda Berry books, I feel like you have an idea of where it's going and she gives you so many different twists and turns and I really did not expect the ending. Reflecting back on it now, I feel like I definitely could have, but it's one of those things where Lucinda writes in such a way that I am so wrapped up in the surroundings, it really feels like I am there with these people that I am not looking forward at all. Like I am very much in the moment of what I'm reading and she is so good at captivating me like that. So I probably could have guessed the ending, but it really did take me by surprise. This wasn't my very most favorite work of hers, but it was not a bad book whatsoever. I ended up giving it 4 stars just because, again, I've read so much of her work. I felt like it was a really awesome book. It just wasn't my favorite of hers, and I still highly recommend it. So the next book is one that unknowingly is probably one of my favorite books of all time. So I was just browsing in my library and that's where I actually picked this book up originally from and where I read it from, but I loved it so much that I went out and I got a physical copy for myself. Browsing my library aisles, I pulled it out and I read the blurb. It says, Amanda is a new mother. She is breaking. After a fight with her partner, she puts the baby in the car and drives from Queens to her hometown in rural Ohio, where she shows up unannounced on the doorsteps of her estranged childhood best friend. Amanda thought that she had left Carrie firmly in the past. After their friendship ended, their lives diverged radically. Carrie had a baby the summer after high school, became a successful tattoo artist, and never escaped Ohio's conservative grid of close-cut grass. But the trauma of childbirth and shock of motherhood compel Amanda to go back to the beginning and trace the tangled roots of friendship and family in her own life. And as soon as I saw rural Ohio and I saw stuff about motherhood, I was like, sold. So the book is called Everything Here is Under Control. And right off the bat, reading the first chapter, I was like, this feels like one of the books that I know I'm going to love for a really long time. I bought this copy just so I could go through and I'm not done yet, but I could go through and I could highlight the very important things to me that I was reading. If someone asked me what being a new mom is like, I would hand them this book. I would hand them this book that I have all the highlighted parts of. It does such an amazing job of representing motherhood in ways that are hard but beautiful It's not afraid to talk about the difficult subjects while still respecting everything that's put into it. I don't know how to explain it. All I know is that this is one of the most profoundly amazing books that I've ever read as someone who lives in rural Ohio, who had so many of these same feelings. I just resonated with this book so much. It's just one of those books that I will never forget reading it. Emily Adrian did such an amazing job with this book. I just can't put it into words. And especially she nailed it right on the head with everything with rural Ohio. Reading it, you know, there's not a ton of representation for just like regular rural towns in Midwest United States. And I love seeing that. I know people probably want to read about other places they don't live, but I love seeing where I live in a book. And this just nailed it right on the head. And it tackles a lot of other important subjects as well, not just motherhood, but motherhood obviously being the focus. I don't know, guys. I don't know what else to sit here. I just want to keep telling you how much I love it. That's all I know is this book. If you are interested in reading about motherhood, I can't recommend this enough. It's beautiful. It is one of the most beautiful books I've ever read. I love it so, so much. It has such a special place in my heart. It is definitely one of my favorite books of the year and one of my favorite books of all time. I'm so glad I bumped into this at the library. Like, I just pulled it off the shelf because I thought the cover was really interesting. And when I read that blurb, it just kind of spoke to me. So I don't know why more people don't talk about this book. It's exceptional. Thoroughly enjoyed that book. Obviously, it was a 5-star. And then next up, I got this one from the library as well. It was Pack Up the Moon. This is by Kristen Higgins. And I had high hopes for this one. I saw a lot of people talking about it on TikTok and a lot of people saying that, you know, it made them ugly cry and that it was super emotional. And basically it is about a wife who knows that she's dying. So she writes a letter a month for the first year that she's gone for her husband. I really like this book. I think the way that grief is written about is very relatable. It is really tangible as well. You can feel the love between the characters even when one of them has passed. It's a really romantic book and I really enjoyed it. I just think it could have been a lot shorter than it was. I feel like the love story itself, 3 stars. It's, you know, very run-of-the-mill. Somebody's dying, somebody leaves something for them afterwards, you know, to help them cope with everything. That has been there, done that. I think it's a good storyline. It's just one that you see pretty often. But the characters, it was what makes it 4 stars. I would read about these two making a grocery list. I loved them together. I don't know how to put it. It's really hard to convey that level of connection in romance books a lot of the time. Honestly, I think that's what I feel like is lacking from a lot of romance books. This book did not lack that whatsoever. I loved the husband. I loved the wife. I loved hearing about their time together. I did skip over some parts that were kind of dragging. It was a little wordy at some points, and I think that's why I didn't give it 5 stars, but I did end up crying. I don't cry easily, especially not with books, so it's kind of hard to get that from me, but this book definitely delivered. I feel like it's a pretty good romance. Next up is now also one of my favorite horror books of all time. Guys, I am so excited. Like this book, okay. So let me start off by, I've seen this book so many times and I did not want to read it because of the cover. And I almost missed out on this book because of the cover. So it is Paul Tremblay's A Head Full of Ghosts. And looking at this, I thought it was a jail cell. Don't ask me why. I thought that this was like a bunk bed and like this was like a jail cell, which doesn't even make any sense because like they have skylights in jail. I don't know why I had that mindset until I was at Barnes & Noble and I saw this and I turned it this way. Listen, I know. So it's a hallway. This is a staircase and this is a big window. So anyways, once I was like, oh, I actually really like that cover, I went ahead and I got it. Again, went into it completely blind. And I'm going to say something really controversial, and I hope I don't spark too much of a debate, but I do not read Stephen King books. I could go into a complete in-depth about how I feel about him and why I don't read Stephen King, but I will say that anytime his name is up here and he's saying that he liked a book or that it scared him, I tend to agree with him. So I don't personally read Stephen King books, but I do look for his opinion on books because I feel like if it spooks him, it ends up spooking me. So I'll give it a go. So this is not a new book by any means, and I am so glad I read this. It doesn't beat Hex. Hex is still my favorite, but this is probably second to Hex, which I feel like is a pretty good feat. So this is about a family. There's a husband, a wife, and 2 daughters, and the oldest is exhibiting signs of being possessed. I'm not going to give away details because I think that's as much as I want you to know, because the stuff I read in here was unsettling. On a scale from 1 to 10, it's a 10. I feel like with most things when it comes to horror, there's a fine line. If it goes too far into being cheesy, it's like, okay, this is obviously fake. Obviously, it's like someone's lying here, there's a trick being played, something like that. And then if you go too lightly with it, it's like, is this even scary? Is this even a problem? And this towed that line so well. Like, it was just creepy enough for you to be like, this girl is probably actually really possessed, without going too much on the other side where you're like, obviously something else is going on here. Wow. Okay. And I think that's all I want to tell you about it. Just go into it knowing that, and I think you're going to have a fabulous time with it. It's not a long book whatsoever. Let me see, how many pages was this? It's not even 300 pages, and I cannot recommend a book enough. Like, if you like horror, if you liked my recommendation with Hex, I think you are going to thoroughly enjoy this. I can't express how much I enjoyed that book. And then the next one is another library pick. I was actually surprised to see this at my library because it's a new horror one, and it is And Then I Woke Up. So this is actually a kind of typical horror story turned on its head. So you have the whole end of the world kind of feel, apocalyptic, if you will. There's monsters that are suddenly here, people are turning into monsters, that kind of thing, until you find out that that's not actually what's happening. You are following one narrator, and you get his experience with this and figuring it all out. And you're like, okay, yeah, like this is following every other apocalyptic type of storyline I've ever read before. And then you find out that it wasn't actually people turning into monsters, that those people who thought they were witnessing that are actually the ones infected. So it's not really an apocalypse of the body, it's more of the mind. There's those who are infected, and then there's the others, and the people who are infected think that other people are turning into monsters or these horrible things are happening, but they're actually not. It's just I don't want to say figment of their imagination, because these people act on it. So it's a lot more than just imagination. It's what they believe to be true, but it's false. And it's scary because these people do believe to be threatened and that these scary things are happening, but they're actually not. So these people have a hard time understanding what's real and what's not. And that's kind of the horror story. So the other people who are not infected have to protect themselves from these people. So basically kind of sends a lot of people into exile. And there are cures that are talked of, but it can always come back. So even if you are cured, there's a chance it won't stay that way. I thought that was really interesting. I did not know anything about this book going into it either. I just knew it was really short. I wanted to give it a shot, so I did, and I really thought that was cool. It just a typical horror type of storyline turned on its head to make it a little bit different. I thought it was really unique. And you're just following this character's experience with everything. I don't want to give too much away because it is so short. I really enjoyed this one. I can't remember if I gave it 4 stars or... Yes, I gave it 4 stars. And it was only because I wanted something a little bit different. You're following 2 different timelines, one in the past, one in the present. You're following the present one, and for very good reasons. I can see why it's included, but it focuses a little bit more on that one, and I wanted a bit more of the past, honestly. I wanted to kind of see how this all unfolded. I was just more interested in that storyline than the present one, so that's the only reason why I gave it 4 stars. But it, again, is a quick read, and if you like the sound of it, I would definitely give it a shot because I thought it was really interesting. Next up was our book club read for the month of May, and that was One True Loves by Taylor Jenkins Reid. I have never read anything by her before, but I have heard really great things, and this book did a pretty good job. I will say that I'm in the minority. I think a lot of people felt like this book was lacking in our book club, and a lot of people gave it like 3 stars. Like, it wasn't a bad book, but they felt like the ending was a bit rushed, which I do agree. I wish that it would have played out a little bit more. I mean, it's not a short book, over 300 pages. And I just wish that it would have gone a little bit deeper. I think that's what everybody in the book club wanted out of it. So you have Emma and Jesse. They are married. They are husband and wife. And on their 1-year anniversary, Jesse goes missing in a helicopter crash. He is presumed dead because several of the people that were also in the helicopter are found to be dead. And they declare him dead. Emma moves on with her life. She is actually engaged to somebody else. And then she gets the phone call that Jesse has been found and he's actually alive. So she is having to decide between picking up where she left off in her old life with Jesse or continuing the life that she had began with her current fiance. So she's basically picking between husband and fiance, which is obviously a very unique situation. And I felt like this book did a really good job of showing the confliction between the two and not knowing how to even begin to know where to start with that, because there would be so many different feelings. Do you go back to the person that you lost and that you would have given anything for to have again and pick up where your lives were cut short? Or do you honor the new life that you've made since the years that he's been gone and everything that has changed since then, because you're not the same person? Honestly, I wasn't in love with either of the male love interests. You have Jesse, her husband, and Sam, the fiance. I really didn't like either of them, if we're being completely honest. Their reactions to the whole thing just didn't love. They were a couple of red flags for me, and I didn't really like root for anybody other than Emma. I just wanted Emma to be happy, and honestly, at some points I was like, girl, you know what, maybe just cut your ties with both. But I was actually really happy with the ending. Like I said, I wish it was a bit more developed. I wish that it would have gone a little bit deeper. At the end of the day, I'm really happy with how it ended. I thought this was a pretty good book. I gave it 4 stars, and I will read from Taylor Jenkins Reid again. Next up is this horror buddy group read that I did with some people, and that was Pretty Girls. So this is technically a thriller, but I'm just going to tell you right now, I do not agree with that categorization. I would definitely say this is extreme horror. I don't know how Karen Slaughter gets put into the thriller category, because it's extreme. You need to know that this book has just about every trigger warning that I could ever possibly think of. It's a heavy book. I don't think that I could have sat down and read this book in just a few days like I like to do, where I just read one book at a time. I'm glad that this was like a buddy read that we split up over the week, so I was just reading a chunk a week. I think that's probably one of the best ways to go about this book. It is not light. It is not, honestly, sometimes it's not even fun. I'll just read you the back of the book. It says, it's been more than 20 years since Claire and Lydia last spoke. Claire is a glamorous trophy wife of an Atlanta millionaire. Lydia, a single mother dating an ex-con, struggling to make ends meet, but neither has recovered from the disappearance of their sister Julia 2 decades earlier, and the shocking murder of Claire's husband brings the horror and heartbreak of the past roaring back into the girls' lives. So I'll leave it at that. There's a lot of other things that go into this, and you know, the first, 60 or so pages were pretty boring to me, but then it just kind of came out of nowhere, and then it just doesn't stop. And just like I said about Lucinda Berry, I feel like Karen Slaughter wrote about the things in this book with delicacy and respect. At the same time, that doesn't make it any less heavy. This is some serious, deep, dark, twisted stuff that's being talked about in this book. And I don't know. It's definitely not something that I could just recommend to anybody. I think if you're intrigued enough by her work, it might be worth looking at the content warnings and looking into it. I heard a lot of people say very similar things to what I'm saying, and I kind of figured, oh, I probably know what it's about. No. I promise it's worse than what you're probably thinking. And I don't know. I ended up giving it 4 stars because at the end of the day, the storyline was good. I did feel like the sensitive subjects that were talked about in here were done with respect, and it was a well-written book. But 2 things. Number 1, I will never reread this book. I'm actually selling it on my Pango Books because I don't really feel a need to keep this in my possession. I've experienced it. It's time for it to move on. But also, second of all, I just felt like it didn't need to be this long. How many pages is this book? It's over 400 pages, and I just didn't feel like it needed to be that. There was a lot that could have been cut out, and we could have just gotten to the point a lot quicker about a lot of different stuff. So yeah, 4 to 5 stars. It is the most disturbing book I think I've read so far. I would not classify it as a thriller. It is definitely like an extreme horror type of thing. It's very graphic, so yeah, I can say I experienced it, and that's about it. And then the very last book that I have for this month is Hidden Pictures. This is actually one that I picked up from my Barnes & Noble. They are always putting out horror books way earlier than what they are supposed to be on sale for. My store just always does that. And from what I understand from other Barnes & Noble employees who have told me on Instagram, unless a publisher or an author explicitly states that something cannot be set out until this certain date, there's a chance that it's going to be put out early. Hidden Pictures is about a nanny who is taking a new job, and the little kid that she is looking over, Teddy, he starts drawing some concerning pictures. He also has an imaginary friend that is basically creeping everybody out. And then she learns stuff about the cottage behind the main house that she's living in, and about some dark past that it has, and it just starts to take more of a paranormal route. And honestly, that whole storyline sounds kind of like okay to me, but I'm so glad I saw this in Barnes & Noble because I was actually able to flip through it, and I'm going to show you what sold me on this book. So the nanny is talking to Teddy, and she says, "Is Anya," his imaginary friend, "here now? Is she in the room with us?" Teddy says, "No." "Where is she?" "I don't know. Will you see her later tonight?" "I see her every night," Teddy says. "She sleeps under my bed so I can hear her singing." And this is the picture that he draws. Yeah, so I saw that and I was like, all right, it's coming home with me. It's coming home with me. You can see the black markings in there. Those are all the different pictures that you get to see. But this book is so well made. I was just honestly impressed with it. It's just a very well made book in and of itself, like physically. So I would highly recommend having a physical copy. It's not very often where I say like, you know, I would recommend a physical copy over like an audiobook or something like that. Even an ebook, I would still recommend the physical one. I don't know, like, there's something about having these pictures in your hand while the story is progressing. It kind of just adds to it all. So highly recommend the physical copy, but this book ended up going a lot of places that I did not expect it to go. I was feeling like this was going to be a 4-star read up until the ending, and that's what kicked it over into the 5-star read. Now there was something I didn't like, and I just want to put it out there because I really didn't see it coming. I mean, I guess maybe I could have. I just kind of want to put it out there for you guys because I feel like it's definitely something you could skip over, and I feel like it could just do harm to people because it added absolutely nothing to the storyline. But there is a scene where the nanny goes out to eat with her sponsor, and they are at the Cheesecake Factory, and there is a huge conversation about the calories, about the stuff on the menu, and just a bunch of dialogue back and forth, and it did nothing. It was not important. It's not something you need to read. So if you are in a sensitive place with things like that, or you just don't want to read that kind of thing because it adds absolutely nothing to the story, just skip over it. I don't know why it was in there. It was a few pages worth of a whole interaction, and I did not understand why it was in there. It made me kind of annoyed, but the story itself is really good, and I really enjoyed it. I wouldn't say it's the creepiest book that I've ever read, but if you're looking to get started in the horror genre, I think this is like a pretty good beginner intermediate book. I highly recommend it. I had a good time with it. It's definitely going to stay in my collection. So those were all the books that I read in the month of May. I was really happy. I found a couple of just like all-time favorites, which is always exciting. If you made it to the end of the video, why don't we go ahead and put the crayon emoji for all the different drawings that the little boy makes in this book. And if you have any questions, you can also leave them down there. I'll do my best to answer them. If you enjoyed the video, make sure to give it a thumbs up. And as always, thanks for watching.